we are very pleased to have Ms. Suraya from Bank Negara. One thing that we have note before coming into the sharing by yourself is Bank Negara has released quite a number of guidelines as well as exposure draft. So there is the 2024 climate risk stress testing, really navigating the financial institutions. There is also the financial sector blueprint 2022 to 2026 to position financial as an ecosystem to facilitate transition to a greener economy. So there are also quite a number of initiatives regulators and Bank Negara have put out, and that has also put Malaysia within the regional space in terms of leading with clear directive on some of these areas. So with that, maybe I can invite Ms. Suraya for you to share with us, how can the financial sector as a start help in supporting the transition towards achieving greener supply chains? Ms. Suraya? Okay.
It's a bit.
Yep, we have your.
I really hope you can hear me clearly. So yeah.
Can?
Okay. So I've actually issued several at the end.
I don't know if everybody can hear, but I can now hear.
Same here.
Yeah.
We seem to have a problem with the button.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me? My line is very choppy, but I'll try again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Perhaps, Arina, what I'll do is I'll just start my presentation and I'll take on questions during Q&A if that's okay. I'm sorry about that. Again, thank you so much, Arina, and Assalamualaikum and very good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to join the panel discussion today. So again, sorry if I have some technical issue at my side. Today, I would like to discuss a topic that is close to my heart and has gained momentum over the years. So my presentation today will focus on the impact of climate change to businesses and the role of the financial sector in supporting green agenda. As everyone is aware, climate change poses significant and growing risk to businesses, our economy, and the financial market. Unlike the COVID-19, there is no vaccine against climate change. So responding to climate change has become a national priority. The 12 Malaysia Plan is advancing sustainability as a key theme, focusing on advancing green growth as well as enhancing the sustainability and transforming the water sector. As a country, Malaysia is committed to unconditionally reduce economy-wide carbon intensity against GDP by 45% by 2030 and achieve net zero GHG emissions as early as 2050. So as you can see, climate change is real and it impacts businesses' competitiveness as well as viability. Physical risks associated with climate change are already with us and are actually rising. We only need to look at these severe floods that are occurring at shorter intervals and with greater intensity. It can cause damages to property of businesses, lead to higher cost of doing businesses. And transition risks are also intensifying. Consumers are more environmentally and socially conscious and demand businesses to be greener and more sustainable. Trading partners and regulators are also setting high expectations that may affect the competitiveness of Malaysian businesses. For example, Malaysian SME exporters' competitiveness will be severely impacted by the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM. SMEs that fall under CBAM Wave 1 and Wave 2 sectors, which include businesses in cement, iron, rubber, and few other sectors, are at risk of losing market access and competitiveness should they fail to comply with the CBAM requirements. So for your information, prior to CBAM, Malaysia has already been challenged on the environmental sustainability front by our trading partners. For example, in relation to oil palm cultivation, which have significant impact on trade exports and the livelihoods of our smallholders. So it is very likely that similar issue may encroach onto other sectors. So domestically, within the announcement of the net zero national target, we can expect further changes in the climate policies because this is inevitable, thus heighten transition risks for businesses. And technological changes will also have important financial consequences for businesses. Moving on to the next slide. So it's actually very important. Thank you. Hence, it's very critical for businesses to transition to green and sustainable practices. It's very important for you to build back greener and more sustainable post the pandemic. Delaying transition will lead to sharper and more costly adjustment in the future. And for Bank Negara Malaysia, preparing our financial system and supporting businesses, in particular the SMEs, which account for significant share of our economy to become more climate resilient, is integral to achieving our goals of preserving economic stability. So the financial sector, given its importance to the economy and influence over businesses and individuals, play a crucial role in driving changes for a sustainable future. Like what Arina mentioned earlier, we've actually issued the financial sector blueprint. In the financial sector blueprint, underpin 3 broad outcomes, which is finance for all, finance for transformation, and finance for sustainability. So we aim to facilitate an orderly transition to a greener economy through integrating climate-related and environmental risks in prudential regulations, and this relate to documents that we have issued and supervision as well, supporting an orderly transition to a low-carbon economy and integrating climate risks in Vietnam's internal functions and operations. To some extent, we are also trying our best to measure the emissions level from Bank Negara's operation. Just for information, the Joint Committee on Climate Change, also known as the JC3, co-chaired by Bank Negara Malaysia and the Securities Commission Malaysia, was established in 2019 to pursue collaborative actions for building climate resilience in the Malaysia financial sector. So members comprise of senior officials from Bursa Malaysia and 21 financial industry players, as well as institutional investors and experts. The priorities of the JC3 are anchored by the 5 subcommittees under JC3. In scaling up green financing, immediate priorities centered upon building ecosystem to facilitate transition to green economy. So Bank Negara Malaysia has actually issued several papers, like what Arina mentioned, and one of the key paper is the climate change and principle-based taxonomy. So the CCPT or the climate change and principle-based taxonomy is one of the building blocks to accelerate transition towards a low carbon and climate resilient economy. In contrast to other taxonomy in the world, commitment and willingness of businesses to improve practices are taken into account when financial institutions classify economic activities. This is the special thing about the Bank Negara CCPT, is to encourage financial institutions, in particular the banks, to nurture and educate clients, as well as providing advisory for clients by sharing the common approaches undertaken by businesses in developing transition plans. We would like more and more businesses to transition. Bank Negara Malaysia is also partnering with key business and industry leaders to help support SMEs in their value chain to transition and remain competitive and relevant. SMEs that are plugged in the global supply chain must pivot accordingly to minimize the risk of getting left behind or being shut out of key markets. So Bank Negara Malaysia has also introduced special funds to support businesses, in particular the SMEs, to transition and to transition at a reasonable cost. We are cognizant that businesses will need funding to pivot to new sustainable business model, recalibrate their existing practices, and adopt new technology during their transformation journey. So in view of that, we have actually launched the low carbon transition facility late last year. So this facility is a 2 billion facility, which is available for the SMEs to finance capital expenditure or working capital to initiate transition to a low carbon and sustainable practices. This includes to increase usage of sustainable raw materials, use of renewable energy, and to also improve energy efficiency of buildings and machinery. The fund is available until full utilizations. Besides that, we have also launched the SMEs, the high-tech green tech facility. So it's an 800 million facility allocated for the SMEs, allocated to help the SMEs and innovative startups to grow their businesses and invest in strategic sectors and green technological fields. These funds are channeled through participating financial institutions. Let me just pause here and pass back to Arina. Thank you.
Arina, you're muted.
Sorry, Arina, you're on mute, Arina.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Ms. Suraya. I think it's clear that the regulators have put out the building blocks to transition to green economy. And I think quite a number of the importance of having the transition planned out, simplified, and enabling the broader market and businesses to transition is going to be critical. Maybe for now, I will move on. We do have questions, Ms. Suraya, but maybe I'll move on now to actually invite maybe Roberto first. Hearing from what Ms. Suraya has mentioned, we do know that businesses in Malaysia has been warned about the EU CBAM mechanisms, which will kick in, whereby there will be pricing on emissions and carbons moving forward if they are exporters to EU. So maybe I will not steal the thunder and maybe let you share what are the application of sustainable practices when it comes to supply chain management. How can, what do you see in Malaysia? Could you give us a brief overview of how do you see the supply chain present certain challenges and opportunities, especially in the current context in Malaysia?
All right. So, yeah, thank you very much, Arina. So I would like to take a quick step back, if I can.
Sure.
And go and define what is, we're talking about greening the supply chain, but what does it mean? What is a supply chain sustainability? So supply chain sustainability includes all the efforts that companies put to consider the environmental and the human impact of the journey of their products through the supply chain. So this includes energy, raw materials, sourcing of different raw materials, the production, the storage, the delivery, and every transportation link in between. So conventional supply chain management is about speed, is about cost, is about creating cost efficiencies, for example, and reliability of the operations. Sustainable supply chain is about adding the ESG dimensions to that. Okay, so this means addressing global issues such as climate change, water security, deforestation, human rights, fair labor practices, and corruption and governance. So this is an important concept to understand. What do we mean by sustainable supply chain? So where is the challenge? The challenge, as I was mentioning before, there is a lack of visibility into the supply chain network. Okay, because business normally works with the vast, incredibly big supply chains and in multiple tiers. So getting this visibility is not very easy sometimes. So next question is, why should we care about supply chain sustainability? Why should we care about ESG? I think this is an important question. Yes, we have heard about the financial side of things, which is extremely important, but let's try to look into the different drivers, okay, that would push a company to look into supply chain sustainability and ESG in general. So sustainability is a very emerging mega trend. If you look at, for example, yesterday, the UN published this emission gap report 2022, and it's a very, very, very important report. I encourage you to go and look it up. And basically, they say that there's no credible pathway to 1.5 to limit the climate, the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. There's no credible pathway. So, climate change is becoming an emergency. The UN is actually defining this a catastrophe. So it's not really something that we can take lightly. But anyway, to go back to the drivers to ESG and sustainability, and opportunities as well. Branding, for example, researchers they have found that consumers may be willing to pay 2 to 10% more for products that provide supply chain transparency, for example. This is an important element. Investors' relations. Institutional investors are keenly aware of the reputational risk of unsustainable supply chain operations. And a lot of finance instruments, as we heard from Bank Negara, are linked to ESG performance. Talent retention, for example, millennials in particular, they seek a much greater purpose in their work. So they want to work with companies that have a demonstrated license to operate, okay, which is not like a stamp, but is basically the acceptance for from a wider range of different stakeholders. Obviously, compliance, you need to care about ESG because the compliance landscape is becoming more and more complex. Governments around the world are mandating greater supply chain sustainability, in part to meet, for example, the United Nations 2030 agenda, and also other incoming rules. For example, the corporate governance due diligence from the EU and others. Competitive advantage. Companies across the world are choosing business partners that tie well within their sustainability efforts, goals, and strategies. And this is particularly important for SMEs. SMEs need to be cognizant, they need to be aware of this, and they need to start adapting their business model, their strategy to this. And also what we observe, that there is a more integration between ESG risk into the enterprise risk management, into the overall risk management within companies. Companies need to understand that the most prevalent risks moving forward are ESG related. This is not me telling you, this is the World Economic Forum. The most relevant risks moving forward are ESG related. So any business leader who doesn't take into account ESG related risks and use ESG related risks to drive its strategy, the strategy of the company, is not doing a good job. So Arina, how am I doing with time? Do I have still another minute, or shall I stop here?
Yeah, we definitely would want to invite you on the landscape of EU, but maybe I'll pause here and we'll invite you back. With that, I think it's good that we now hear from Ms. Rose. I think Ms. Rose, you have an extensive experience hearing from Bank Negara and BCSD. Now let's hear from Ms. Rose what's happening on the ground, given your experience on the importance and how this has been navigated by the business level. So I think you have very interesting slides. So Ms. Rose, if we can have the slides up. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arina. Yeah. So it is great to hear from Ms. Suraya and Mr. Roberto, who has given an overall perspective of sustainability. And for me, I would like to kind of focus very much into raw material supply chain. Now, as Malaysia continues to be an attractive investment destination for global investors, with manufacturing sector being the key pillar of economy, thus greening the raw material supply chain is immensely important. Now, to ease my explanation on this, let's refer back to the slide. You look at the first row, which depicts what is typically happening today. Now, supply chain begins with the sourcing and extraction of raw materials from natural resources, which are delivered to manufacturers who will then process them into finished goods, which is consumed by consumer at the end of the supply chain. Now, at the manufacturer, rejects that do not meet specs are often scrapped and discarded. Or at the end of life, or when one wishes to upgrade your equipment or gadgets, the consumer can actually choose to discard them. And traditionally, all this would have landed in the landfill. Now, moving forward, all stakeholders, after experiencing all the the adverse effect of our actions, all stakeholders from different sectors need to shift to eco-innovations that can lead to sustainable consumptions and production patterns, which is what Sustainable Development Goal number 12 calls for. Now, SDG 12 is part of the United Nations SDG goals, yeah? And that's what we envision the future raw material supply chain to be. And I'd like to focus what happens to these defective parts from the manufacturer. Some companies have started to explore to reverse some of the processes of these fallouts so that they can rework to reuse them in their production, thus minimizing rejects. Now, for computers, many branded companies have also allowed the reuse, but that is after personal confidential data have been properly sanitized prior allowing to reuse or remarket. And for those parts of equipments which is beyond repair, we can always recover and refine the metals and plow them back into the raw material supply chain pool. Now, recovering metals using the state-of-the-art recycling processes generates only a fraction of this carbon dioxide emission. Example, production of 1 kilogram of aluminium by recycling uses only 1/10 or less energy compared to that required for primary production of aluminium from bauxite. Now, by adopting eco-innovations, primary metals and energy resources can be conserved for future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. With that, we do have quite a number of exciting questions coming up and for every panelist, but I would like to just give the stage to Encik Shafiq from OCBC. I think it's very important to now hear from the financial institutions, the bankers, and the capital providers. Now, given what we have heard, the importance, how are you seeing capital being facilitated to actually driving the supply chain ecosystem in this respect? I know OCBC has done quite a number of interesting deals, and it is really very much shifting from conventional financing to greener financing and to a certain extent, sustainable financing or sustainable instruments. So it is a pleasure to have you, Encik Shafiq. And I know you have 2 slides. So maybe we'll have the slides up and Encik Shafiq will hand the stage to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Arina, and a very good morning to everyone. First of all, my sincere appreciation to the organizer for having me today to share some thoughts from a finances perspective on the importance of bringing the supply chain. I think, having sharing the points or, listening to the points presented by the other 3 esteemed panelists, we would realize by now that supply chain emission is critical, or it's a key contribution towards the overall carbon emission. And the thing is that when we talk about supply chain emission, it falls within the category of Scope 3 emission, and that is the most difficult the most difficult to be managed, because Scope 1 and Scope 2, you are dealing with a factor that within your control. But when it comes to Scope 3, you are dealing with external parties, and you would need to basically get yourself into certain areas that could be beyond your control. So that is the biggest challenge. And I think there is a research that says that 80% of carbon emission across all industries are actually coming from Scope 3 emission, which is the supply chain, and that includes the financial industry itself. So it means that a financial institution like OCBC is also facing the same kind of challenges in managing our Scope 3 emission, or what we call finance emission. So given that, it's very crucial for all stakeholders to put more focus into reducing this type of emission. A financial institution will also need to contribute towards decarbonizing the supply chain. So the 2 slides that I've prepared, which are shown on screen right now, would probably give some a quick snapshot on how sustainable finance has helped to reduce Scope 3 emission based on our real case studies. So the first case study is on Axiata Group. OCBC successfully arranged the world's first Islamic sustainable syndicated multi-currency financing for the group. And the financing itself is linked to certain sustainability performance targets or SPTs, and one of which is for Axiata to reduce the group's total annual carbon emission by a certain percentage as agreed between the financiers and Axiata. So if you look at the diagram, Axiata Group's carbon emissions mainly derived from its telco business, which is coming from their subsidiary company, edotco. And given that telco towers are traditionally built from steel, it leads to an increase in Axiata Scope 3 emissions, arising from the amount of carbon emission during the steel manufacturing process. And you can clearly see that it doesn't stop there. The mobile users who receive the network signals from edotco's towers, like it or not, we are all the end users, right? So we are the contributor to the Scope 3 emission. I believe that this is something that some of us may not even realize that we are basically contributing to the overall carbon emission. And obviously, if nothing is being done to decarbonize this overall supply chain, it would also result in an increase in OCBC Scope 3 emission or the finance emission, given that we are one of the key financiers for Axiata Group. So as part of its carbon reduction strategy, this is quite interesting. edotco has implemented several decarbonization initiatives, which include building up to 31 bamboo towers. Of course, we may not have seen that in Malaysia, but this has been implemented in other parts of the ASEAN countries, where you can see bamboo towers being used as telco tower. And according to Axiata's sustainability report, this initiative has resulted in 70% reduction in carbon emission per site. So when you talk about supply chain emission, right? If you are able to tackle the source of carbon emission, basically the entire supply chain would be decarbonized. So that's what happened for Axiata, and the successful decarbonization process has also led to the SPT, the targets that we have agreed with Axiata for them to achieve under the financing being met. And Axiata is able to enjoy lower financing costs offered by OCBC and other syndicate financiers. So that is like a token from OCBC to Axiata for number one, helping the overall or the entire environment by reducing their carbon, and number two, indirectly contributing towards reduction in OCBC's Scope 3 or finance emission as well. And how we would normally communicate or basically tell the client is that sustainable finance could be seen as a catalyst for them to achieve the target, because all this while they have been working on it and they wouldn't be able to enjoy any financial benefits, but with sustainable finance being in place, they could see that all the initiatives that they have put in place, and if those are all those sustainability targets are being achieved, they would be able to see a direct benefit to their bottom line. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is another case study, what we did for Sunway Group. So Sunway Group has came up with an initiative to reduce its carbon emission by increasing its renewable energy generation into the total energy consumption mix. So bearing on that, we have basically used that as a target or a KPI for Sunway REIT's sustainability-linked bond, which was arranged by OCBC. So again, if you look at the diagram, Sunway REIT's business supply chain, it involves both Scope 2 emissions for the shopping mall's operation via the purchase of conventional energy, which then leads to Scope 3 emissions for the retailers and consumers, and ultimately OCBC as investor of the bond. So again, people like us, the end user, every time when you buy, when you go to the mall, you buy something from the retailers, you are actually contributing to the overall carbon emissions under the Scope 3 category. So what Sunway is currently doing, or what they have done and continue to do, is to install rooftop solar power plant on their shopping mall, which would result in higher composition of renewable energy in the company's total energy consumption. So lower consumption of conventional energy would immediately reduce the carbon emission throughout Sunway's entire business supply chain. So I will take a pause here, but I hope that by sharing this simple diagram, I hope that the audience would have better understanding from a layman perspective on how a supply chain emission works, and how do we actually, without even realizing, are basically becoming a contributor towards carbon emission.
Thank you, Shafiq. But before we take down the slides, I think we can leave the slides on, because I think it gives a very, very good context, and it's amazing to see how it has been nicely stringed into one slide to show, articulate how emissions reduction have been considered within the supply chain as part of financing the transition. Now, we do have very popular questions from the audiences today on other key sectors. So maybe I'll quickly take a quick question with Encik Shafiq yourself. Given that Malaysia has very two parts, the SMEs and the agriculture sector, and feel free to come from any angle, whether it's SME or agriculture. Now, we do see that it is a challenge for the SME to take on this journey. And the use case you shared is essentially the large key players in the corporate Malaysia. Now, how do OCBC see in terms of rallying down the supply chain, supporting the SME in this respect? What have you seen would be critical for the SMEs in the market to watch out for?
Okay, so basically when it comes to SMEs, again, number one, what we need to look into is the types of business and industry that they are operating in. And from there, we would know what kind of supply chain that they have to deal with. You see, say for example, if I were to look at agriculture, right? Of course, it's if I take plantation as an example, whether it's large corporates or small holders and whatnot, the obvious question is that where do you get your supply from? You see, so whether you are taking supplies from a sustainable supplier, if you own a small mill, say for example, the FFB or the supply that you are taking to be processed in your mill, whether that comes from a sustainable supplier or not. So traceability is one thing. If you own a small plantation land, then it goes back to certification in terms of meeting both the local and also the international standards. So again, firstly, we need to know what types of industry that you are operating in, and we need to know who are the parties that you are dealing with throughout the entire supply chain, and how banks or financial institutions like OCBC will be able to help is through our financing products, as what I've shared in the slides, right? We do have sustainability linked financing, so that can also be extended to the SMEs as well. And we are what we are currently doing now is that in order to basically encourage our clients to look into decarbonizing their supply chain, we would be able to offer types of financing facility that would have a more competitive kind of financing rate if they can prove to us that they are sourcing their materials or their feedstock from a sustainable suppliers. So that is one of the initiatives that we have, in order for us to work together with our client to decarbonize the supply chain. Because we have to always keep in mind that if they are able to reduce the supply chain emission, we would then be able to reduce our finance emission and scope 3.
Thank you, Encik Shafiq. One thing is I would like to quickly link to Ms. Suraya, and this is very critical area that we need to navigate. Now, if everyone needs to transition, there will be a lot of challenges on data sets, on emissions, aside from OCBC and from what we've heard from the esteemed panelists. What are your views when it comes to ensuring there are efficient enablement of ecosystem to navigate data management on emissions? So there has been questioned on what kind of greenhouse gas measurement providers, are there assurance parties required? How do you know the emissions are correct? Is there a repository system? Now we know in Australia, the government has already put out an open data platform on emissions, to be facilitated, so everyone has clarity on each other's emission. And we know in Singapore, because of carbon tax, emissions needs to be audited by facility to facilitate carbon tax. So I know it's a tricky question that comes in your way, but I think everyone wants to know what are regulators thinking in this respect. Ms. Suraya?
Thank you so much, Arina, for the question. So as you're aware, data has always been a big issue. In fact, internally, under JC3, we have a subcom focusing on addressing data gap, which is the subcom 5, bridging data gap. So coming back to data, although it's an issue, I guess it's very important for companies to start to measure. So to confidently report your GHG emissions, for example, you need to start measuring, and to measure, you will need to collect the data. You have to start now. You have to start early, learn as much as possible, engage consultants if necessary. So even based on Negara's experience in measuring our GHG emissions, for example, we encountered various data-related challenges. Not all data that we are currently collecting can be used to measure GHG emissions. For example, in fact, we require more granular data. For example, measuring scope 1, which is the most basic, companies must have data on primary fuel used for company cars. So that's the importance of collecting data. In addition to that, coming back to the standards, so as you're aware, the International Accessibility Standard Board, the ISSB, is actually assessing feedback and finalizing 2 IFRS accessibility disclosure standards by end of this year. So more and more companies are adopting TCFD recommendations and doing the disclosures. For B&M, we have actually announced mandatory adoptions of the TCFD recommendations by financial institutions by 2024. So in order for financial institutions to effectively adopt these TCFD recommendations, we require we require businesses to start measuring again and start to also disclose their data. So it's very important for them to measure, report, and validate if necessary. Yeah, I pause here, Arina.
If I may add on a bit from that, is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So there are 2 key elements here. One is data, the other one is disclosure, right? So from a finances perspective, what we want to see is how reliable the data is, when we talk about data. So that would simply mean that we would need to know the detailed mechanism on how the data is being gathered, and whether those data that are being disclosed in, say, your sustainability report are actually being verified by a third party. The other element that is also key is that because we have seen some companies, they have made public on their commitment towards achieving net zero by 2050, but that is still a long way to go, right? But what is missing is their short to medium term targets to basically demonstrate at least their plans and to show some trajectory towards meeting the 2050 target. So for banks, when we look at yes, you have made the commitment and you you have made it public that you are committed to achieve zero by 2050. But we also would want to know what are your plans and what are you doing now? Or if you have not started doing anything, when do you plan to do that? And what are your your immediate targets? And how do you see from where you are now? How do you basically tell us or describe to us your plan for you to be able realistically to achieve the 2050 targets? So that is what a financial institution like us would want to see. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Encik Shafiq. I'm actually keen to draw the urgency now for SMEs within the supply chain of various sectors. So the urgency comes from always, if there's a cost to action and inaction, what would it be? So we know, Roberto, this is up your alley. So we've touched now quite a number of the regulations, the financing, the value proposition to go green, to tap on some of these green and sustainable finance. But if companies do not transition, what's the cost to inaction? What could threaten business resilience? For example, if we were to have carbon tax or taxonomy that comes in the region, in Malaysia, or we are seeing the EU carbon border adjustments that Ms. Suraya has mentioned, that will be taxed on a few key sectors: energy, fertilizers, steel, and so on and so forth. So in that respect, can you share with us a bit more what's coming to those who are exporting to EU within the supply chain?
Thank you very much, Arina. So let me just split your question into two parts, okay? So you were asking me also to comment about SMEs and what they need to do. So I think it's very important for companies in general, but especially SMEs, to understand what are the big trends, okay? So for example, if a company operates in a carbon intensive sector, say oil and gas, for example, let's say you are an SME in the oil and gas sector, and you have been doing the same type of business for many years. So you must be aware that the company that you work for example, you work for a large oil and gas company, is transforming. So the company is under pressure to transform and to transition to a low carbon modality, okay? So over the next few years, this company will transition, and it's very important that you as a company transition together if you want to maintain your competitiveness, if you want to stay in business. So it really is important to gain that kind of understanding, and also to gain an understanding on how the regulatory landscape is evolving, okay? So when it comes to labor, when it comes to occupational health and safety, environmental, ethical standards, policy regulation, and throughout the value chain. So these are very important considerations, because you, for example, as an SME, you may be required to change your business model, for example. You may be required to change fundamentally the way you run the business. Now, the second part of your question was about the European Union carbon border adjustment, if I'm correct, yes? Okay, so here it's important to understand a couple of things. First of all is the concept of carbon leakage, okay? So companies, they tend to move their production from countries where there are stringent environmental regulations to those with softer standards, okay? And this, unfortunately, may lead to an overall increase of global greenhouse gas emissions, okay? This is a normal, understandable rule. So carbon leakage can be addressed through border taxes, okay, on products imported from countries with the low carbon prices or softer standards to countries where there are higher standards, for example, or higher carbon prices. If we look at the European mechanism, or the mechanism that EU is proposing, if a country, for example, of production where the goods are manufactured, okay, implements already a carbon tax, so the EU importers are allowed to claim a corresponding reduction of the CBAM. Okay, so this is, it would take a much longer time to explain the intricacies and all the rules and all the different details. But anyway, so in a nutshell, this is how it works. But I want to go back to something quite important that would put this regulation in the right perspective. So let's look at the EU and ASEAN trade relations. So the EU is ASEAN's third largest trading partner. Okay. However, if we look at the scope of applications of this carbon border adjustment mechanism, it will only apply initially to some high-risk products like iron, steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizers, and electricity imports. Okay, this is in the preliminary stage. So currently, if we look at the trade relations between ASEAN and EU, 86% of ASEAN's export to the EU are manufactured goods that fall outside those categories. Okay, so this must be said because the impact, if this goes, if this regulation is enacted, it goes into effect, it won't be so serious immediately. Nevertheless, it's important to understand that this type of trend is a trend that we will see in Europe and we will see in other jurisdictions moving forward. And it's important as a signal because there has to be a harmonization in terms of carbon pricing, in terms of carbon taxation, in terms of measures that all different countries adopt to limit greenhouse gas emissions. So this, in my point of view, would be the right perspective at this point in time to look at this particular regulation. And I would stop here.
Thanks, Roberto. So in short, I think it's very clear to everyone that, if you do not prepare yourself when the regulations of the taxonomy comes in, it will trickle down the supply chain and it may result in some of the players within the supply chain, be it SMEs or those who are providing the commodities players, will all be directly or indirectly impacted. We are coming down to the end, but I'm keen to raise this critical question to Rose because I think you represent the market players in various forms. So we are seeing that circular economy is also going to be a game changer for a lot of businesses within the supply chain management. So in your experience, what are the key challenges that you've seen needs to be critically addressed when it comes to supply chain management? Because by having clarity end-to-end of emissions may give you more information, right? On where are the big areas or big elephant in the room to navigate emissions reduction. However, to actually have that infrastructure, it requires time and effort. So without having those balancing of how much extent you need to go or how much effort or resources is required, that is typically the dilemma of businesses when it comes to driving where are the focus areas within a business model. So Rose, maybe share some views when it comes to your diagram of the circular economy. What have you seen are the tips for businesses who wants to really build up their resilience?
Okay, thank you, Arina. So maybe can you flash slide number 2 for me, please?
So while the slide is coming up,
okay,
yeah.
Now, while this basically Malaysia do have the infrastructure, okay, that is needed to facilitate the greening of the supply chain to support manufacturers intending to comply to these raw materials. I mean, we are talking about the raw material supply chain in particular. Okay, so in this slide, you can literally see I'm taking the example of a scrap printed circuit boards, which is the most complex e-waste, and that is commonly found in all the electronic waste, which is growing exponentially, where closed loop or circular economy can take place in an environmentally sound management facility. And you are right, to set up infrastructure like this, it takes years. And yes, there is such a facility in Malaysia. It's just that the visibility of it, because many years ago, when we start talking about circular economy, you're talking about using recycled material, everybody will kind of frown upon it because, their incoming QA may not like it, because they always think that, anything you recycle from a scrap is a no-no because that will affect the quality. Okay, so I'm glad if you really look at this today, there's a big paradigm shift in how people are emphasizing, businesses are emphasizing to use the recycled material. Now, this slide basically shows the circular economy for the printed circuit boards, okay, from collections itself, okay, to segregation process. That means we collect it from the industries and then we segregate, in the facilities, to the state-of-art technology, which is designed to extract optimally, let's say in this case, like copper, precious metal from electronic waste. Now, the technology adopted uses renewable energy, okay, known as the waste to energy with clean gas system, because it is crucial to ensure that the emissions are clean, yeah? And all this is made possible through the R&D. And in Malaysia, there's already infrastructure. I saw some of the questions posed in the chat group. Yes, Malaysia does have the infrastructure. Now, here you can literally see how the urban mining can actually take place and how we can plow back this into the raw material supply chain pool, thus conserving the natural resources and energy resources. Now, coming back to the other question, Arina, about what does it really take to ensure the success of the greening of the supply chain? Now, basically, all the stakeholders plays a very important role. Yeah, in particular, I would like to emphasize the three key players. Manufacturers, they themselves have to start start qualifying suppliers supplying recycled material. And I'm really happy because there are already big players, big boys who are really starting to look into that. Yeah. And number two would be treating local recyclers in particular, as this is part of the raw material supply chain, yeah, as your partners. And these people need continuous supply of consistent waste, which is their raw materials for production, so that all the initial effort in the research and development to develop optimal recovery process and yield optimization are not wasted. I hope this gives a different paradigm shift to the manufacturers, yeah, and to the waste recyclers. This is important, yeah, because for us to support the raw material supply chain pool, yeah, to help in the greening of the supply chain, you need to upgrade your facility to ESM, environmentally sound management facilities, to ensure you are not obsoleted, to ensure that you stay relevant. Okay, otherwise, we are finished, okay, down the road. Now, at the same time, you must be willing to invest in good technology, adopt continuous improvement for yield optimization and process optimization, because we have to stay globally competitive. Number three, we all need to self-regulate. Yeah, we have to be ahead of the regulatory curve. The fourth part would be end of the journey. There must be a sharing benefits to the manufacturer who are your customers, encouraging them to dispose their waste through ESM facility so that the manufacturer or the customer can stay in long-term partnership with you. And last but not, and one of the most important, stakeholders will be the policy makers, there must be a paradigm shift. And we need to look at the industrial waste as resources for the country and raw materials needed for urban mining by recyclers with ESM facilities. Now, we really, the other point would be policymakers need to relook into this spectrum of supply chain contribution to the nation. Yeah. Third point will be there must be an understanding of the challenges of manufacturing facilities and recycling facilities so that you can do business matching and at the same time monitor the gaps to ensure the success of the partnership. And last but not the least will be support the local recycling investors. Yes, we invest, it needs huge capital investment, yeah, because the local recycling investors with state-of-art ESM facility, as this infrastructure is very important pillars for ESG to be successful, in particular SDG 12. Over to you, Arina.
So thank you very much. I think we've come to the hour at 11. As you can see, the banner for this session, thank you very much, the STAR, in hosting this panel. It is a 1.0. So, we have a very good list of questions that have advanced and demonstrated that the participants are all coming from various sectors, are deepening the discussions on ESG in the supply chain. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to cover everything. It would take probably another 5-6 sessions to look at very interesting critical areas such as agriculture. What are the technologies in agriculture sector to move the needle? We've also not touched on the other aspects like plastic, circularity, waste management in that sense that would take to the strategic level of discussion. So with that, I think the key takeaway points that I would like to summarize is while everyone is looking for a way to navigate their business model and resilience, I think what's important is really to be very open in terms of conversation within the supply chain. Having that open conversation and asking the better questions would actually help to navigate clear partnerships. I think quite a number of SMEs, large corporates, are on a pathfinding to get there faster, smarter, and more efficient. As you can see from the questions today, everyone's very open to ask the right question. So maybe I will take this opportunity to thank the very esteemed panelists, Ms. Rose, Roberto, Ms. Suraya, and Encik Shafiq, for your participation in the 1.0 forum on greening the supply chain. And maybe my ask or request for the start is to have the follow-up 2.0 and 3.0 so that we can advance on this conversation in a targeted manner. Last but not least, one key takeaway is I know that the panelists have all been very good speakers. So if you're keen to take on this conversation in their respective field, kindly follow them on their LinkedIn. They do appear in quite a number of forums, and you can definitely take this conversation to the next level. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to the star.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Arina. And indeed, yes, we are planning to do Greening the Supply Chain Part 2 and maybe even more. Yeah, so please do join us when we do that. We will be sending you messages to invite you. So thank you so much, Arina, and to our panelists as well, Encik Shafiq, Mr.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Thank
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you a bit.
Yes.
Okay. I think the connection went off for a while. And also thank you all to the audience who listened so diligently and very interestedly and engagingly, and also sent so many good questions. So I think that's very good. So it has been a fruitful session, and I think we have learned a lot from each panelist, and we have gained some valuable takeaways. And yes, we hope to bring it up to the next level in the Greening Supply Chain Part 2. So before we end, help us complete the evaluation poll that will appear on your screen now. And while you complete the poll, please scan the QR code on the screen to register for the StarESG Awards next webinar on 29 November, where our focus will be on solar advancements, how companies can transition to renewable energy with long-term savings for a cleaner earth, or smart savings for a cleaner earth. So yes, QR code should pop up. Okay, great, it's there. So yeah, please do scan. And we'd love to get your perspectives on renewables in the next webinar. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And a big thank you to OCBC Bank and Hibiscus Petroleum for supporting and making this webinar possible. Have a good day, take care, and stay safe.